Hey everyone, welcome back. We're going to be doing a deep dive today on anhedonia in adults with autism. We're looking at this article from Cheap ABA. It's called Breaking Down Barriers, Understanding Anhedonia in Adult Autism. And I got to admit, even just that title got me thinking, we talk about challenges, but what about the simple joy of living?
Mm.
You know,
Yeah.
what happens when things that used to bring you pleasure,
Yeah.
they just don't anymore?
Yeah. It's a real heartbreaker. Anhedonia, like the article explains, is basically the inability to feel pleasure from things you once enjoyed. Like the color palette of life kind of fades, and that can be really isolating.
Yeah, it's more than a bad day, right? It's this persistent feeling of flatness.
Mm-hmm.
The article dives into four main areas that contribute to anhedonia in adults with autism: sensory processing,
Mm.
executive functioning,
Mm-hmm.
social isolation, and the impact of other mental health conditions. So let's kind of unpack these, maybe starting with that sensory processing piece.
Yeah, the article makes a really fascinating connection between sensory overload and anhedonia. We talk about the heightened sensory sensitivities in autism, but imagine your brain's constantly bombarded by intense sights, sounds, textures. It's exhausting.
Yeah, wow. I can totally see how that constant state of high alert
Yeah.
would make it tough to relax and actually enjoy anything. It's like your internal alarm bells are always going off.
Precisely. And when your brain is working overtime just to process everyday sensory input, it leaves very little energy for experiencing pleasure. It's almost like a survival mode where enjoyment takes a backseat.
That makes so much sense. For me, even like a crowded grocery store can be overwhelming. The article also mentions executive functioning as a factor.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking about, how much planning and effort it takes me to do something I want to do, even something fun. Does the article touch on that at all?
Absolutely. Executive function is all about those skills we use to plan, organize, manage our time and emotions. And for many autistic adults, these skills can be a real struggle. So, yeah, even something enjoyable like going to a concert might require a level of planning and emotional regulation that feels really insurmountable.
It's like hitting a wall before you even start.
Yeah.
So you just end up avoiding things that, deep down you actually want to do.
Right, and that avoidance over time can really feed into the cycle of anhedonia. It's not just about the inability to feel pleasure in the moment, but also about the emotional consequences of missing out on those
Yeah, this
experiences.
is getting really deep. It's like anhedonia impacts your motivation, your self-esteem, creating
Yeah.
a vicious cycle. And then, of course, there's the social aspect. The article points to social isolation as a major contributor to anhedonia.
It makes you realize how interconnected we are as human beings. Meaningful connections are really crucial for well-being. But for many autistic adults, navigating the social world can be incredibly challenging.
Oh, it can be so draining.
Yeah.
I know I've definitely felt that sense of isolation, like I'm on the outside looking in.
Right, and when those social connections are lacking, that feeling of loneliness and disconnection can really amplify feelings of anhedonia. It's like the joy gets sucked right out of everything.
Yeah, it really paints a picture of how these different aspects, the sensory overload, the executive functioning, struggles with social isolation, they all intertwine and contribute to this feeling of anhedonia. And it's not just about these challenges in isolation, right? The article also talks about co-occurring mental health conditions.
Yeah, that's a critical point. Conditions like depression and anxiety are very common in autistic adults. And you know what? Anhedonia is often a key symptom of both of those.
Wow, that's a heavy thought. It's like dealing with a double whammy. You're facing the challenges inherent to autism, and then on top of that, you might be struggling with these additional mental health issues that can further impact your ability to experience joy.
Exactly, and sometimes it can be hard to tell what's causing the anhedonia. Is it the autism itself, the depression, the anxiety, or a combination of all three? So this can make diagnosis and treatment a bit more complex.
This is all starting to feel pretty overwhelming, to be honest. But before we get too bogged down, the article does offer some hope, right? There are ways to support adults with autism who are experiencing anhedonia.
There are, and we'll dive into those strategies next. But before we do, what stands out to you so far? What's resonating with you?
It's a lot to process, honestly. Makes you realize how much is going on beneath the surface, especially when you consider how often autistic folks are told to just try harder or cheer up. But knowing that anhedonia could be tied to these deeper neurological and social factors, that's huge. Like finally having a language to describe what's going on.
I completely agree. It's about validation, isn't it? Understanding that this isn't just a personal failing, but a complex challenge with real solutions. And speaking of solutions, the article doesn't just leave us with a diagnosis. It offers some concrete strategies to support adults with autism experiencing anhedonia.
Okay, good. Because at this point, I'm ready for some actionable advice. What's the first step?
Well, the article emphasizes the importance of creating sensory-friendly environments. We talked about how overwhelming sensory input can contribute to anhedonia, so minimizing that overload is key.
That makes perfect sense. But how do you actually do that? It's easy to say reduce sensory overload, but in a world that's often designed for neurotypical brains, that feels like a tall order.
You're right, it's not always easy. But even small changes can make a big difference. Think about creating a designated quiet space at home with dim lighting, comfortable seating, maybe some noise-canceling headphones.
Oh, I could totally use a space like that. Sometimes I just need to escape the chaos.
Exactly. It's about finding those pockets of calm where your brain can finally relax. And it goes beyond the home environment, too. Maybe it's advocating for sensory accommodations at work or seeking out quieter social spaces.
So it's about being proactive and taking control of your sensory experience,
Yeah.
rather than just feeling at the mercy of your surroundings. I love that. What else does the article suggest?
The next strategy focuses on structured activities. And I know what you're thinking. Wait, wouldn't structured activities feel too rigid and overwhelming?
Uh-huh. You read my mind. It seems counterintuitive. If you're struggling with anhedonia, wouldn't the last thing you want be more structure?
But here's the key. We're not talking about any rigid, arbitrary schedule. It's about finding activities that are structured and aligned with the individual's interests. Remember, executive functioning can make it hard to initiate and follow through on things, even things you enjoy. So having a clear plan with predictable steps can actually make it easier to participate.
Ah, I see. So it's not about forcing someone into a box,
Yeah.
but rather providing a supportive framework. That reduces anxiety and allows them to focus on the enjoyment.
Exactly. Think about it this way. If you love painting but struggle with actually getting started, having a structured art class with set times, materials, and instructions can be incredibly helpful.
It takes the pressure off of having to make all those decisions and just allows you to be present with the activity. That's brilliant. What's the third strategy?
No surprises here. Fostering social connections. We've talked about how isolating anhedonia can be, and how social isolation itself can worsen anhedonia. It's a vicious cycle.
This feels particularly important because for many autistic adults, social interaction can be a minefield. It's exhausting trying to decipher all the unspoken rules
Yeah.
and navigate those nuanced social cues.
It can be incredibly draining, but that doesn't mean meaningful connections are impossible. It might just require thinking outside the box.
So what are some ways to build those connections in a way that feels safe and authentic?
Well, the article mentions support groups specifically for autistic adults. There's something so powerful about being in a room with people who truly get you, who understand the challenges and triumphs of living with autism.
I can imagine. It's like finding your tribe. No more masking or trying to fit in, just genuine connection.
Exactly. And online communities can also be a great way to connect with like-minded individuals, especially if in-person interactions are challenging.
That's a good point. The internet can be a lifeline, especially for those who feel isolated geographically or socially. So we've got sensory-friendly environments, structured activities, and fostering social connections. What's the final strategy?
Addressing any underlying mental health conditions. This is crucial because, as we mentioned before, anhedonia can be a symptom of depression, anxiety, or other mental health challenges.
It's like peeling back the layers of the onion, isn't it? You've got to address the root causes, not just the symptoms on the surface.
Precisely. And that often means seeking professional help. A therapist can help untangle those complex factors and determine the best course of action.
It's about recognizing that mental health is just as important as physical health. And there's no shame in seeking support.
Wow, this has been a really eye-opening discussion. We've covered so much ground. From understanding the complexities of anhedonia to exploring practical strategies for support.
And while the article provided a fantastic foundation, it also sparked some deeper questions for me, specifically about the relationship between anhedonia and autistic burnout.
Oh, interesting. Tell me more. I'm definitely familiar with the concept of burnout, but I haven't really connected it to anhedonia before.
Well, think about it. Burnout is that state of complete exhaustion, where you're emotionally, physically, and mentally drained, you've hit a wall, and even the smallest tasks feel overwhelming.
Ugh, yeah, I know that feeling. It's like the world is moving at a million miles an hour, and you're stuck in slow motion.
Exactly, and I think that's where the connection to anhedonia comes in. When you're in that state of burnout, it's not just that things feel harder, it's like the ability to experience joy. It just gets completely depleted. You're running on empty, and there's just no energy left for pleasure. Wow, that's such a powerful way to put it. It's like the burnout has sucked the color out of everything, just like anhedonia does.
Right. And it makes me wonder if anhedonia could be a warning sign of impending burnout, or even a symptom of burnout itself. Like maybe if we pay attention to those early signs of anhedonia, that loss of interest in things we used to love, we could intervene before the full-blown burnout takes hold.
That's a fascinating thought. Anhedonia is like a canary in the coal mine, signaling that something bigger is going on.
Exactly. And it reinforces the importance of taking a holistic approach to well-being. We can't just focus on treating the symptoms of anhedonia in isolation. We need to consider the broader context of the individual's life, including the potential role of burnout.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I feel like we've gone on a real journey together. From understanding the basic definition of anhedonia, to exploring its deeper connections to sensory overload, executive functioning, social isolation, mental health, and now even burnout.
And I think that's the beauty of these deep dives. We're not just skimming the surface, we're diving deep into the complexities of these topics, and hopefully coming away with a richer understanding and new insights to apply to our own lives.
Well said. And to our listener out there, we hope this deep dive has given you a new perspective on anhedonia in adults with autism. Maybe it's helped you make sense of your own experiences or given you some ideas for how to support yourself or someone you care about.
Remember, knowledge is power. The more we understand about these complex challenges, the better equipped we are to navigate them and advocate for the support we need. And don't be afraid to keep exploring. This deep dive might be over, but the learning never stops.
Absolutely. Keep asking questions, keep digging deeper, and keep sharing your own experiences and insights. After all, we're all in this together. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey of discovery. Until next time, stay curious and take care.